So you probably heard this a lot. You need to rise to the top of your field or be able to show that you've risen to the top of your field in order to have a strong EB-1A profile. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean to rise to the top of your field? And what does it mean to have strong evidence to show that you've risen to the top of your field? In this video, we'll be covering what it means to rise to the top of your field based on my experiences having spoken to hundreds of EB-1A aspirants and also having sat in on multiple profile evaluation sessions with an immigration lawyer. This is my understanding of what it means to have risen to the top of your field. So here are just 3 things that we'll be covering in this video that you should understand before building your profile and collecting the evidence to show that you've risen to the top of your field. The first thing is job title. We'll be covering what job title actually indicates and why it doesn't always mean that you've risen to the top of your field. Just because you have a senior job title does not mean you've risen to the top of your field. The second thing is anchor criterion. This is something you have to understand in order to understand what it means to have risen to the top of your field. We'll be talking about how to show that you have a strong anchor criterion and how to collect the right evidence to show that you've risen to the top of your field based on your anchor criterion, which tends to be leading or critical role or original contributions, but it could also be other criteria, which is the third thing we'll be covering. You don't actually need to necessarily show that you've risen to the top of your field based on leading or critical role or original contributions. There are other criteria you can target to show that you've risen to the top of your field, but usually it does tie into a strong anchor criterion. For example, serving on the board of a top organization in your field or a top company, or serving on a major committee, serving on a major committee, getting media coverage, getting top awards. These things can also show that you've risen to the top of your field, but usually they also tie into having a strong anchor criterion. So let's dive right into the first thing that a lot of people get wrong when they're trying to understand this concept of having risen to the top of their field. They think that because they're a VP or a director, they're automatically at the top of their field. That's not necessarily true. In fact, the opposite can be true. You can have a pretty nondescript job title, but still be able to show that you've risen to the top of your field, be able to show leading or critical role, or be able to show original contributions. And that's because showing that you've risen to the top of your field is about an anchor criterion. It's about showing that you've done something that is related to leading or critical role, shows that you have a leading or critical role, or shows that you've done, and this could be having significant impact on your company. Maybe you're helping generate hundreds of millions in revenue for your company. Impact on your company. Or, for example, leading a significant division within your company. So, while these things can tie back to job title, perhaps you have a job title that indicates that you're in such a leading or critical role, it doesn't really work the other way around. Just because you're a director doesn't mean you're doing something that is leading or critical within your company. For all you know, you could be one out of thousands of directors in your company, and you could be just managing a small part of the business. The other thing is, job title isn't really as important as anchor criterion. Just because unless you're like the CTO or CEO, unless you're in the C-suite, job title won't really necessarily matter as much as you think it will. So the second thing you have to understand is anchor criterion. Going back to the initial question of what does it mean to have risen to the top of your field, usually it means having a strong anchor criterion, which is leading or critical role, or original contributions. What are these 2 anchor criteria? And what is an anchor criterion? An anchor criterion is the foundation for your case. It's what sets the context for then showing how you have risen to the top of your field. An anchor criterion is usually one or two things that you have done that on its own show that you are a top professional. And why leading or critical role or original contributions? Usually these are the two criteria that set the stage for a strong anchor criterion and provide the context so that USCIS can understand how you have risen to the top of your field. So going into the first thing, which is leading or critical role, if you have a role that has had a significant impact on your company, then you most likely meet leading or critical role. This could be millions in revenue generated for your company, or maybe you manage the core division for your company that is responsible for the jobs of thousands at your company, and you're the head of some department that influences thousands of jobs at your company. You're the number one head. So this is how anchor criterion ties into understanding how you've risen to the top of your field. Without these concepts, without this structure, it's really hard to just claim that you've risen to the top of your field on the basis of, say, job title. You need to show specific evidence, and these are the two lenses you should be using to explain to USCIS how you have risen to the top of your field. So leading or critical role. Original contributions is the other one. Maybe you helped shape your field by creating a new standard, like industry standard that's now used by other major companies in your field, or maybe you created some sort of new framework that has completely transformed your field. So notice how understanding these two criteria and the concept of having a strong foundation helps add so much more detail to the idea of having risen to the top of your field. You can't just claim that you've risen to the top of your field without providing evidence. And these two anchor criteria provide the most context. If you can claim just some of these things, if you can just claim one of these criteria, you can provide so much more context to your claim that you have risen to the top of your field. But in order to be able to even identify these things within your profile, and the right things that is, you need to understand anchor criterion as a concept as well. You need to understand how context matters a lot for your case, and how you create that context is by showing that you're able to claim at least one anchor criterion or even both anchor criteria. But these aren't the only things that matter for showing that you've risen to the top of your field. There are also the other criteria that you can use to show that you've risen to the top of your field. And this is just more like additional context. But when you have at least one anchor criterion, you can usually then claim that you meet all these other criteria at a very high level. So say you have leading or critical role. You're one of the top executives at a major US company, and you help shape the field, and then you also lead a department for thousands of employees at your company. Usually that actually translates into board positions or even committee positions at top organizations. And these also matter to showing that you've risen to the top of your field. They contribute to what are called final merits of your case. This is when USCIS takes a step back and looks at your entire case and tries to see if everything ties together to show that you have actually risen to the top of your field. And this is where the other criteria can come into play. So awards, media coverage, these aren't really other criteria, but more so other elements of your case can come into play. They can provide that even further, more in-depth context to your case beyond just anchor criterion, beyond just the mere claim that you have risen to the top of your field. Awards, media coverage, board positions, committee positions, maybe even top publications. These all can contribute to the additional context that you need, the additional context to the claim that you have risen to the top of your field. So that's just a brief overview of 3 things you should really understand if you want to better understand this concept of having risen to the top of your field. It's not enough to just make the claim that you've risen to the top of your field. You need to point to specific things within your profile to then show that you've actually risen to the top of your field, you need to add depth to your claim. And that just goes so much more beyond just making the claim that you've risen to the top of your field. You need to, going back to the initial document that we created for this video, you need to understand that job title is not the only thing that indicates that you have risen to the top of your field. Sometimes it doesn't indicate anything at all. You could have a very nondescript title and still be able to show that you've risen to the top of your field. Second thing is anchor criterion. You need to understand which anchor criteria you meet, if it's 1 or 2 or none. But understanding leading a critical role in original contributions can at least help point you in the right direction as to identifying the activities that can then help you make this strong claim that you have risen to the top of your field. And the third thing is that other elements to your case can also point to the final merits of your case, and explain final merits earlier in this video. But the other criteria can also provide that additional context to your anchor criterion and to the overall claim that you've risen to the top of your field. So it's not just about the specific activities related to your anchor criterion. It's about the other things like board positions, like awards, like media coverage, and that can definitely tie into your anchor criterion, like leading a critical role, that then help provide that additional context to the claim that you've risen to the top of your field. So that's just my understanding of what it means to have risen to the top of your field for EB-1A. And this is how I would approach collecting the evidence and understanding how I personally, or if I do at all, have a profile that will help me make a strong claim that I've risen to the top of my field. So understanding anchor criterion and understanding that there are other criteria, other elements at play that can help you make a strong claim that you have risen to the top of your field.